Welcome to Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. Shalom to all of you across the Atlantic Ocean and around the world. I'm Dan Diker, president of the JCPA. I'm sitting here with my esteemed colleague and dear friend Maurice Hirsch, Lieutenant Colonel Reserve Maurice Hirsch, and this is our daily Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs War Diplomacy Briefing, War Room Diplomacy Briefing, which actually with our newfound partners at JLTV, it's being called Frontline Israel, combating the Iranian regime, Hamas, and Hezbollah. And that is exactly the story that we are facing. We are now in day 46 or 45, right? 45, day 45 of the post-October 7th Hamas-Iran ISIS-type massacre in southern Israel. And there are certainly developments to report to you, particularly in the north. We have, there are a couple of 100,000 people that have been evacuated and are living in hotels towards the center of the country. So it's a situation that is acute and continuing, and it is a medium to long-term situation. It's not something that's going to be solved. We've lost 66 soldiers thus far in this ongoing and evolving war against the Iranian regime, and it's
in Gaza itself.
In Gaza, yes, 66. Correct, not including those up in the north. It's 60,
or on the first day of the massacre,
not including the first day of the massacre, which that number has been revised to 1,300 as opposed to 1,400 people. But it should be known that the mass execution, the mass murder of teens at the Nova Peace Festival, that number has been raised to 350 teens that were murdered in that Peace Festival. As we move forward, Maurice, share with us just a couple of observations about where we are today before we turn to our esteemed guest, Professor Kobi Michael of the INSS Institute for National Security Studies, who has produced a very far-reaching paper for the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs called Hamas Numbers Warfare, in which Professor Michael will help us understand the grand deception strategy of the Hamas as it is reflected in the warfare of casualty reporting, which has been completely disfigured, but has been adopted by the international media uncritically, which is a very important part of the war against Israel in the grand deception strategy of Hamas and its Iranian paymasters. But first, just for a minute, over to you, Maurice, just for a quick update before we turn to Professor Michael.
So thank you, Dan. I think probably the two main additions that we have to give from yesterday, we won't go over again exactly what's happening. The IDF are still operating in the northern Gaza Strip, a little bit of an extension to some points in the southern Gaza Strip. But I think the two major developments of yesterday were information put out by the IDF following the raid on part of the complex of the Shifa Hospital. Two major developments. One, firstly, the security footage from within the hospital that was seized by the IDF that shows hostages being taken into the Shifa Hospital
on October 7th.
On October 7th. Now, people have to understand that they weren't being taken there for immediate medical treatment. The Shifa Hospital is very, very far to the west. It's almost on the coast of the Mediterranean coast. And in order to get to Shifa, the terrorists had to pass by some 8 or 9 different medical installations. So they weren't being taken there to receive medical treatment. So that's the first thing. And we've seen literally pictures of hostages being taken into the hospital. Secondly, the understanding that at least one of the soldiers who were kidnapped, Noah Marciano, was actually killed in the complex of the hospital. These are two things which are fundamental for understanding why the IDF forces needed to operate in the hospital itself, in the area of the hospital itself, and to understand that what we've seen so far is probably only the tip of the iceberg. We understand that there is more there. There is probably going to be more developments there, but just to provide that initial explanation of why the IDF went into a hospital. So those are the first thing. The second thing is that really the exposure of a 50-meter long tunnel underneath the hospital, 10 meters deep in the ground, another small, again, tip of the iceberg of what the IDF and the intelligence understands was being run from the hospital, under the hospital, by the terrorists as part of that wider strategy of using civilian installations in general, but specifically hospitals as a cover for their activities. That we know are the two really major developments of that picture, even if they are only small insights actually into what's going on there. In the north, if we go up north, we're still seeing the continuation of this war of attrition between Hezbollah and Israel. There's still anti-tank fire being shot by Hezbollah, Israel responding, and that's continuing on. Judea and Samaria, we're still seeing the high levels of terrorists trying to carry out attacks, multiple attacks that are being already carried out, some of them unfortunately ending in fatalities, as you very well know, and some of them being prevented as they were about to happen. In Israel, relative calm, as we've said over and over again. Just a 2-second insight, Dan, with your permission, and for our viewers, into the market research survey that was published by a Palestinian institution, that not only showed that 75% of those Palestinians interviewed positively support the massacre carried out on the 7th of October, but also massive amounts of support for creating, as they see the situation. They were given two options: a one-state solution run by Israel, almost no support; a one-state solution called for the river to the sea, a Palestinian state, 79% support. That's how the Palestinians see this ending. At the same time, really, they reject any idea of coexistence, but they also reject the hand that feeds them. They see the terrorists in a very, very positive manner, levels of support really up in the 80% plus for all of the different terrorist organizations, Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad. But on the other hand, the negative involvement of America, UAE, Saudi Arabia, all of the people, the European Union, all of the people who have literally been feeding them and supporting them and providing them with funds, the Palestinians see them as only a negative influence.
Yeah, it's clear.
In the 80s and 90%.
Yeah, so, it's a very important point that you point to, and I know that Professor Michael is the former deputy director of the Strategic Affairs Ministry and in charge of the whole Palestinian directorate there, can shed a lot of light on this. But I'll just say this before we turn to Professor Michael: the Hamas PLO war for the Palestinian hearts and minds of the Palestinian street has been the war behind the war that has been going on now for certainly since 1988, since the Hamas charter, 1987, since the Hamas was first established, and since Hamas's charter evolved in 1988. And in fact, the last 5 or 6 rounds of war opposite Hamas in Gaza have really been for the hearts and minds of the Palestinian street, which has been targeting Israel in order to
garner support
exactly. And I know that Professor Michael will shed a lot of light on that. Welcome, Professor Michael from Haifa. Thank you for joining us for this very important briefing. Let me first point to your very important paper, Professor, which was just published the other day, and it's been very widely circulated in English language media worldwide, but particularly in North America, I will say. And it's called Hamas Numbers Warfare. And what you did in the paper was to point out the systematic deception of Hamas reporting via what's called the Palestinian Ministry of Health in Gaza, which has been uncritically accepted by the major networks, Sky, BBC, the American networks, without asking any questions. And the numbers, as you point out, are absolutely fantastic and extraordinary, but don't reflect the truth of the situation on the ground. Professor Michael, the floor is yours.
Okay, Dan, thank you for having me. Yes, you are right. This is a work of art with regard to Hamas, and unfortunately, it is something that is so frustrating with regard to the international media and parts of the international community that eventually collaborate with Hamas disinformation and misinformation and all of this numbers warfare. We have to understand that at the end of the day, there is no any, I would say, a distinction between Hamas and any institution in the Gaza Strip, be it the health ministry or even UNRWA. All the institutions in the entire Gaza Strip are under a full control of Hamas, and therefore they will provide figures or they will provide information according to Hamas interests. This must be our working assumption, not anything else. Now, I think that in the paper that we have published, we actually brought it, I would say, to the edge with regard to the
Whoops.
media in this regard, because actually it is not only the question of being a bit critical with regard to the reliability of Hamas, is the idea of just questioning some basic questions with regard to the figures, how it comes. And we provide some examples there with regard to the figures, which are just unreasonable, okay? And the most unreasonable fact with regard to the figures is that there is no even a single terrorist of Hamas which is included in the figures of the killed people in the Gaza Strip, where we know that there are more than 3,000 terrorists of Hamas that were killed. And the idea that they provided such huge numbers of very hard or severe wounded people, they have reached to the number of 40,000 or something like that, where nobody in the international media just asked himself, how many beds are in the entire Gaza Strip from the north to the south, including all the hospitals and all the clinics in the Gaza Strip? And there are no more than 3,000 beds, okay? Not according to Kobi Michael, but according to the World Bank. So how it comes that they have 40,000 severe wounded? Where are all the people located? How it comes that only 90 of them were evacuated to Egypt? Why not 9,000, okay, were evacuated if they are in such a severe condition, and so on and so forth. And I think that one of our missions is, when we are facing the questions, or we are asked the questions by the international media with regard to the figures, or generally speaking with regard to any interpretation which is given by Hamas, we have to be, I would say, very strict, and in some occasions, I would say even a bit aggressive, and to make them to feel shameful, because I think that this is, I would say, a sort of irresponsibility from the professional point of view with regard to investigating media or honest reporting.
A lot of this, the uncritical acceptance by the international media, Professor Michael, come actually from, in a sense, fear on the ground, because a lot of the stringers and what are called stringers and the media representatives of these networks, many of them won't even allow their employees to go into Gaza, so they rely on basically Hamas loyalists in order to pass them the information that they end up broadcasting internationally.
Or on Al Jazeera, okay, which is a Hamas channel. Everybody knows and understands that Al Jazeera actually provides all the services, the propaganda services for Hamas, and Al Jazeera, unfortunately, and in a very irresponsible manner, just ignites all the Arab streets in the Arab capitals, in the Arab countries here in the region. And I thought that one of the first things that the United States of America should have done in day one of the war was to bring Qatar on its knees, not to make Qatar the princess of diplomacy here in the region, taking into consideration as if Qatar really interested in the hostages. No, Qatar is not interested in the hostages. Qatar is interested, first of all, in the survival of Hamas, and secondly, in its position and prestige here in the region and beyond, mainly in the United States of America and Europe, okay? Qatar is our enemy. Qatar is the biggest provider and supporters of Hamas. And therefore, I thought that instead of negotiating with Qatar and negotiating with Hamas through or via Qatar, I think that the United States of America, together with the civilized world, should have bring Qatar to be on its knees, putting an ultimatum to Qatar, saying that they have to evacuate the Qatarian soil from all Hamas operatives there, to stop immediately any kind of support in Hamas, and to shut down Al Jazeera. And if they are not going to do that in 24 hours, then they will remain alone. And I can guarantee you that this teeny and funny country of less than 400,000 citizens and more than 1 million modern slaves wouldn't have survived for 2 days, okay, without the American support, without the American envelope. But instead of that, America and even Israel, unfortunately, okay, they brought Qatar to the front of the stage. Qatar became to be the princess of diplomacy here in the region, and we are relying on Qatar and Hamas in negotiating the issue of the hostages. I think that this is a moral mistake and a strategic mistake.
Yeah, that's a very important point. Actually, we haven't heard this type of analysis about Qatar in our briefings before. This is really the first time. I want to ask you just a pointed question about the numbers game. Lenny Ben David, who is on this call, has just produced a very interesting paper following your paper, in which he spent a lot of time counting bodies and locating the actual numbers. The actual numbers in Gaza are so far different in the breakdown because the Hamas-controlled Palestinian Ministry of Health does not count Hamas fighters, terrorists that were actually killed in these terrorist activities in the Gaza Strip, or, by the way, in Israel. They count them all as civilians. Help us understand the misleading picture that we're seeing and being reported even by CNN and others.
Yes, I think that he is right, and this is exactly what we have emphasized in the paper. And you know, my point of departure in my interviews with the international media is Al Ahli Hospital. I assume that our viewers remember what has happened. It was, I think, 2 weeks ago, something like that, or even less than that. I remember that it was on Tuesday when there was an outbreak, okay, in the media with regard to the bombarding of Al Ahli Hospital in South Gaza, and immediately Hamas reported that there are more than 100 casualties dead. After 15 minutes, they say that the number is 300, and after less than an hour, the number has increased to 500. Okay, it took less than a few hours in order to understand that this was not the Israeli Air Force bombarding. This was a failed rocket of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. It took a few hours to understand that not the hospital was bombarded by the parking lot of the hospital. And it took less than 2 days to understand that we had less than 40 casualties, 40 deaths, okay? But in the entire statistics of Hamas, or the so-called the Gazan Health Ministry, the number of 500 and the blame that Israel bombarded the hospital remained on place, which means that if the actual number is less than 40 and they informed about 500, that the ratio is something like 1 to 15, okay? And this should be our point of departure, talking about the figures or the reliability of the figures which are provided by Hamas.
So I think what Professor Michael is saying, Dan, and is pointed to, is a fundamental about the Hamas figures. And I've seen a study that really does follow the figures almost on a daily basis. This is the number of people they say have been killed. This is the way that it's divided up. These are women, these are children, and you see amazing things there. As Professor Michael said, the number went up by over 500 after the El Ahly hospital was struck. It was never recalibrated. It was never recalibrated, and those 500 people were never taken out. What's amazing to see in the statistics is that the number of children killed has stayed a constant all the way along. Not the number itself, but the percentage. Always throughout. I can show you numbers from the 24th of October to the 14th of November, a 3-week period where the percentage of children killed was a constant, 41%, always. You always have to have that same number of children. But really, we're seeing different types of fighting going on since the ground operation started, since the evacuation of the Gazan civilians. It would necessarily have to have brought about the conclusion that the number or the percentage of children affected or killed would go down. But it hasn't changed at all. The numbers have stayed the same. The number of women have stayed. The percentage of women have stayed the same. It's really a statistical anomaly, because that could never actually happen.
They even abuse, the categorization that the UN does with regard to the age of children. In the categorization or the specifications or classification of the UN. You are a child until the age of 18, but we know exactly what is going there with the children in the elementary schools in the Gaza Strip. And we know that the children in the age of 15 and 16 are active terrorists, armed terrorists of Hamas. Part of their arsenal, and therefore they count the children from day 1 to the age of 18 without any differentiation between the ages. But there is something else that should be taken into consideration, and this is the so rapid manner and way that they inform about the accurate numbers. We are more than 5 weeks after the atrocities, and we still don't know, we are not able to say the exact numbers of the casualties. We are still looking. They, after bombarding any compound, in 50 seconds or in 1 minute, they can tell you 182 deaths. So all the issue is so fabricated. And it's ridiculous that any serious correspondent or journalist who considers himself or herself as serious can rely on these figures, on these numbers, on this information.
But really, those numbers, Dan, serve not only the purpose of lying to the world about really the number of Gazans that have been killed, obfuscating completely the number of terrorists that are killed, but they serve that purpose of arguing that, well, Israel's response is obviously disproportionate, and there are all these civilians who are being targeted, as they say. That's part of that narrative. It's part of the let's adopt Hamas propaganda as true fact, and then taking that step forward of using that propaganda to then attack Israel. And we've seen it from all of the different actors, not only the press, not only CNN, the BBC, and the international media, but also from the UN organizations that often, and here's one of the tricks, if you could maybe discuss it a little bit, Professor Michael, of how the UN organizations and the Palestinian Authority whitewash the numbers of Hamas and its Ministry of Health, that when they say, well, the numbers that I checked were put out by the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinian Authority hasn't been in Gaza for 16 years.
Yeah, because officially, all the ministries in the Gaza Strip are still subordinated to the Palestinian Authority. Therefore, officially, they can say that the health ministry in the Gaza Strip is part of or a branch of the health ministry in Ramallah. But everybody understands that the PA has no stand in the Gaza Strip. They have no influence in the Gaza Strip. They just pay the salaries of the people there. but the only ruling power or the influential power or the dictating power in the Gaza Strip is Hamas. Everybody understands it. At least every Palestinian understands it. Even the Palestinian Authority that try to whitewash, the numbers of or the figures of Hamas. But in addition to that, just today, Hamas in Gaza, through their ministries, the interior ministry in the Gaza Strip, they have published, I don't know if you have noticed, they have published a list of all the civilian facilities that were hit in this war. Okay, did you have a chance to see that?
No.
Okay, so in the list, a very, very tall list, 5 hospitals, I don't know how many dozens of clinics, dozens of schools, dozens of other civilian facilities, but no mentioning, of course, of what actually all of these civilian facilities were used to or for. All of these facilities, first of all, I'm not sure about the numbers, but let's say that these are the accurate numbers. But we know that all the civilian facilities that were destroyed or bombarded or hit by the IDF, they were hit after very careful checking because they were used as human shields and as military compounds. Okay, but this is something that they do not inform about. They inform about the civilian casualties or the civilian facilities damages that were caused by war crimes that Israel exercised. Okay, this is the way that Hamas behaves, and this is the way that they are running their numbers warfare, their propaganda warfare. Unfortunately, it is backed by Al Jazeera and it is echoed by some others. And unfortunately, in many cases, these figures and this information is warmly adopted by international media sources and the international organizations.
Professor Michael, you're an expert in civil military relations as well, not only the issue of the Palestinian Authority, PLO, and Hamas. You've been writing about it for decades. I have as an analyst of the Middle East and following the Palestinian issue for a long time, I have a sense that Israel is responsible, frankly, for a lot of this, the failure to point out this misinformation, disinformation on the side of the Palestinians. If you look at IDF spokesmen today, they appear every day, several times a day, in front of the English language international press, the foreign language media, and they talk about what the IDF is doing, what the IDF has accomplished, what the IDF has managed to foil, the number of terrorists the IDF has managed to kill. But what they fail to do is to point out what you, Professor Michael, and my esteemed colleague Maurice Hirsch and I have been trying to do now for 45, 46 days, which is constantly to point out the disinformation, the deception of the Hamas Iranian regime axis. And I really ask myself the question as to why Israel has systemically failed to attack the enemy in terms of soft power, in terms of disinformation, deception operations, which is a key part of the strategy. Why do they? This is one of the reasons that the world is receiving the wrong information.
I really have no good answer for you then. I think that this is a mistake, a huge mistake. I think that eventually the accumulated consequences are very problematic for us because they are succeeding in accumulating achievements. They are succeeding in positioning their narrative in the international consciousness, and then even when we are coming 3, 4, 5 weeks later with very hard evidence and figures, we can do almost nothing because the consciousness is so solid already that you cannot shake it, you cannot reshape it. I think that we have to be in a constant psychological warfare against them, and I think that we have to fight their propaganda warfare, and we have to tackle the international media on a daily basis, okay, with regard to their interpretations, which are based on Hamas propaganda. And I'm trying to do my best in this regard. I know that there are some others that are doing the same thing, but unfortunately, it is not good enough, or it is not done in a good manner by the state level, unfortunately.
Yes, very much. I just want to point out that our wonderful participants on this call, many of them are repeat listeners, and we have scores and scores of them are pointing out. I know Rufus is pointing out. I'm just going down some of the wonderful comments that we have here that are very incisive and insightful. Even though my mouse is not behaving well, you see stuck. But we did go down and see there are 7 or 8 different comments. There we go. 7 or 8 different comments. Thank you, Daniel. 7 or 8 different comments, really all about deception warfare, asymmetric warfare. This is all part of the same Soviet, Islamist, Chinese type of warfare that's been going on actually for millennia, and which Israel has failed to put its finger on and point. And now I think that it's come home to roost, and it is used against Israel, which is why, ladies and gentlemen, on this call, and to Professor Michael, what we are seeing, what we are witnessing on the international scene, in the cities of the West, in the free world, and most shockingly, across U.S. cities and campuses, is the type of, I would call it, a force multiplied energy, excitement, cheering on in the post-massacre environment that is not self-evident, meaning, which is to say that the only level of excitement, enthusiasm, and energy that outdid this unprecedented mass murder of Jewish children, toddlers, women, unarmed civilians in the Negev, in southern Israel, has been the support that they have received, not only since October the 7th, Maurice and Professor Michael, but actually the BDS movement, which has been in place since 2004 with the publication of the Palestinian Academic and Cultural Boycott of Israel, and then moving into 2007, which is actually the announcement in Ramallah, by the way, in Ramallah, of the Boycott National Committee. They have paved a pathway of genocidal anti-Semitism that has enabled the I believe, enabled the October 7th massacre to have international legitimacy, which is why we are seeing this, and I'm responding to a lot of the comments that our participants have made here about deception warfare, international asymmetric warfare. This is all part of the same global jihad that is playing itself out at Harvard University, Princeton University, Cornell, Columbia, UCLA, and City University of New York, across the United States, and in London, Paris, Madrid, and other major cities. And this is what, by the way, we are attacking at the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs as a main strategic objective, is to expose this type of global jihadist warfare, which comes very much from the which comes from the Iranian regime. It comes from Soviet type of active measures, what we call political warfare, and it has its roots also in Chinese regime, what they call total warfare, or the 3 warfares. We're focusing on that, and that is what this is all about.
What's additional to that, Dan, is that you can't take this as only the propaganda that's put out, not by the BDS movement, by the Palestinian Authority, by the terrorists and their supporters. It's that whole mechanism of whitewashing, entirely whitewashing all of these claims and really embellishing them to the nth degree. You have organizations of the UN that are critical and an integral part of that whole system. The World Health Organization, UNICEF, UNRWA, all of these organizations that adopt and really amplify these claims that Gaza is the biggest open-air prison in the world. Well, everyone knows that that's not true. 400,000 exits from Gaza into Israel just in the first 8 months of the year. 100,000 exits to Egypt. So you're talking about 1 in 4 Gazans left the area just in the first 8 months of the year. You have all these stories that are being told about how Israel treats the Palestinians, and its reference to Gaza, and really turning the propaganda, which you would see clearly as propaganda, into almost a legitimate story of of the victimhood of the Palestinians. And that's what they're playing on. They're playing on this victim card and the assumption that no one will ever check what they're actually saying, that people like Professor Michael don't really exist and will never take them to task for the lies that they're putting out and for the lies that they're whitewashing.
How are you seeing that, Professor Michael, from where you've sat for several decades working on some of these issues?
First of all, I would like to say with regard to the propaganda issue that you have mentioned or you have described as a sort of a combination of a Russian, Chinese, Islamic propaganda, this is exactly what we see, and it is reflected in the regional architecture, because what Israel faces these days, and mainly since October 7, is exactly such a coalition. And this is the reason that the general psyche of the Israeli public is that we are facing an existential threat, that we are in chapter B of our war of independence, not because Hamas is an existential threat or Hezbollah is an existential threat, but because Hamas and Hezbollah are components of a bigger camp or a bigger axis, the resistance axis, which is led by Iran and supported by whom? By Russia and China. Okay, this is exactly the structure or the architecture of the regional power here, which is also articulated in the propaganda which is used by the components of this architecture, by the Iranians, by Hezbollah, by Hamas, and so on and so forth. Now, the other thing that I wanted to say with regard to the Palestinian victimhood, that this is something that is not only warmly adopted and embraced by the international community and mainly by intellectual, I would say progressive intellectual in the West. This is something which is so deeply rooted in the Palestinian narrative, all the idea of the Palestinian ethos that is lying on two main components. On the one hand, the idea of the refugees, and the other side of the coin is the right of return, which of course does not exist. And the other component is the ethos of the armed resistance. Both components actually are I would say, the reflections of the rejection of the Palestinian collective as a collective to accept any right for self-determination for the Jewish people and any right of the state of Israel to be the nation state of the Jewish people in any borders here in the Middle East. And this is the main essence of the problem, and unfortunately this narrative is continued to be eaten by the international community. And therefore I think that at least with regard to the objectives of the war in the Gaza Strip, we have to add to the existing objectives, which are the elimination of the military and governmental capacities of Hamas. We have to add at least two additional objectives. First of all, the dismantling of all the refugee camps in the Gaza Strip. There will not be any more refugee camps, okay? Because the refugee camps, together with UNRWA, that should be dismantled, these are perpetuating mechanisms of the victimhood, of the Palestinian victimhood, the right of return, and the ethos of armed resistance. And therefore, I think that the Gaza Strip that will project not only on the Gaza Strip, but on the entire Palestinian arena with regard to the main components of their ethos.
I think that point, Professor Michael, is exactly on the spot. The idea of UNRWA, its whole raison d'etre is to perpetuate this idea that the Palestinians who allegedly left Israel in 1948 will now come home, the right of return, and then will demographically and democratically destroy Israel. They will all 6 million of these refugees will flood Israel. They will all be given Israeli citizenship, of course, and then they will be able to vote Israel out of existence. That's the goal. That's UNRWA's only raison d'etre. They have no. It has no other purpose. It doesn't help them. It hasn't settled one refugee. Every year, the number of Palestinian refugees grows between 200 to 300,000 people just by sitting and doing nothing. In Gaza,
That's because of birth rates.
because of their birthright. In the Gaza Strip, in the 3 years from 2019 to the middle of 2023, the number of refugees, Palestinian refugees, grew just in Gaza, Dan, by 117,000 people. Nothing was happening there. There was no ongoing war. There was no ongoing situation, but the number was just constantly growing to support that idea of the narrative. And if Professor Michael could really whisper in the ears of every single person who really has the best interests of the Palestinians at heart, I'm sure that he would have to, that would be the main takeaway. Destroy UNRWA. Take away, get rid of UNRWA. It is a source of deception, diversion, and really undermining everything that peace could ever survive for, and just supports this idea of destroying Israel.
Your final comments, observations, Professor Michael, before we just say goodbye to our audience and with a couple of announcements. But your final thoughts, your final observations.
Yes, I think that the idea that the Palestinian refugee population is the only population among many other refugee populations in the entire globe that continue growing, okay, this is another, I would say, demonstration of the series of absurds that we can find in the international community with regard to its reference to the Palestinian issue. And I think that one of the main problems that we are facing or tackling during this sorrow event, this October 7th, is the absence of moral clarity. Okay, and the absence of moral clarity at the end of the day leads to the absence of strategic clarity. Mm-hmm. I hope that the state of Israel, the government of Israel and the IDF will be strong enough and determined enough in order to keep our moral clarity, in order to assure our strategic clarity, because at the end of the day, with the international community, without the international community, we have to finalize the job. We have to finalize the war with the upper hand, because otherwise, if we will not accomplish successfully the mission, and if we will not eliminate the military and the governmental capacities of Hamas, if we will not be able to paralyze the organization as a military and governmental organization, we are going to tackle huge challenges along all the other fronts. And I would like to remind all of us that we are already engaged in a multi-front war, okay? We are in front of 5 active fronts in different levels of intensity, but 5 active fronts: the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, Lebanon, South Syria, and Yemen. And there are 2 additional fronts that might erupt. I mean, Western Iraq and the domestic arena, the Arab citizens of the state of Israel. So this is exactly the reason that in the Israeli psyche, we feel that we are in chapter B of our war of independence. We are under existential threat. And if you are under existential threat, you have 2 options and 2 only: to be or not to be. And due to the fact that the second option of not to be is not an option for us, we remain with 1 option only. And therefore, we have to do whatever we have to do with a very cut and clear moral clarity and strategic clarity in order to finalize things with the upper hand.
I think you said it very well. I think nothing else needs to be said. That was really the bottom line on where we are in an existential threat, fighting the war of 48 all over again. And that is, frankly, what we're doing at the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs, is to fight that war of moral clarity that leads to strategic clarity. I think that's so well said, Professor Michael, and not enough said, not enough emphasized, that connection between moral clarity and strategic clarity. But that is, in fact, what happened on October 7th was not only a massacre of young people and innocent people, but it was also a massacre of conceptions. and that offers us the opportunity to reframe, reformulate, and re-engineer the real conception about what's happening here, not only in Israel but in the Middle East, and to point a very big finger at the source of instability and subversion in the Middle East, which is the Iranian regime and its architecture, what we call the octopus architecture around the Middle East. This is something that has been underemphasized. If you go to jcpa.org and look at Iran's race for regional supremacy, you will see you can download that for free. We wrote that, goodness gracious, almost 10 years ago, before anyone was looking at the octopus, and we're updating that book and others as well. You can find Professor Michael's wonderful paper at jcpa.org. It's called Hamas's Numbers Warfare. Hamas's Numbers Warfare by Professor Kobi Michael. They can find that at jcpa.org. And finally, let me just ask our viewers, we need your help. We've been offered this wonderful distribution partnership by JLTV, based in Los Angeles, but broadcasting nationally across the United States, 75 million households. We need to upgrade all of our capabilities here to really become a broadcast level. It's going to cost us about $12,500. And every donation is completely tax-free from the United States, 501c3, the Central Fund of Israel. You can find the support us on our site. We would deeply, deeply appreciate any support that you could give so that we can transform this JCPA library into equipment that is on broadcast level, so we can really reach millions and millions and millions of homes across North America. So anything is blessed, from $1 to $1 million. We won't refuse anything. And we thank Professor Kobi Michael of the University of South Wales, as well as the INSS, the Institute for National Security Studies, and a guest lecturer and writer at the Jerusalem Center of Public Affairs. Thank you ever so much for your insights, Professor. We look forward to having you again.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much to all of our wonderful our audience, our participants. We see the names, and we know many of you come day in and day out. We try to bring you perspective, context, and clarity in ways that you haven't had the day before, and we deeply appreciate your participation. So we look forward to seeing you tomorrow when we'll have Ben-Dror Yamini, who is one of the great columnists in Israel, talking about, can the free world defeat the Hamas-Iran axis? So thank you all for now. We'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow. And again, thank you very much to our